Okay, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll get started, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wa mursaleen. Nabiyyina wa qudwatina Muhammad. Alayhi afdalu salah wa azka tasneem. Allahumma alimna bima yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima alamtana wa zidna ilman ya Rabbil Alameen. So this is a class on self-reform. Selections from the book Dhariyah ila Makarim Shariah by Raghib Asfahani. We'll talk either this class or next class about how exactly to translate that title. I've been leaving it untranslated intentionally because it's kind of the whole point of the book. So we'll see the punchline either this class or next class, inshallah. And Raghib al-Asfahani, he's taken us through many sort of chapters in this section of the book where he's telling us about ourselves in light of the Quran and the Sunnah, especially from the Quran, and about who we are. And he's kind of moving from talking about our nature and our constitution and how we're made up and how Allah created us with purpose. And he's kind of then shifting to, okay, what is the point? What should we be doing? What's our destiny? What's our mission here? And how the two go together. The things that we're given, that Allah gives us in the due to the fact of us being His creation, they lead organically to the things that Allah wants from us, or the things that Allah has created us, the purposes for which Allah has created us. And so we talked about one of Raghib al-Asfahani's reflections that we mentioned towards the end of last week is that the human being is somewhat different from the rest of creation in that the rest of creation, especially the animal kingdom, if we look into the animal kingdom, we find that things are born and created having these faculties, these advantages, either of defense, or they're able to attack, or they're able to maneuver or escape or evade. All of these sorts of things, they come ready-made. The animals, they have claws and fangs, and they have way better eyesight and hearing than we have, right? Or strength. Tons of animals are stronger than human beings. And some animals, maybe they're not predators, but they're way faster than we are. And so they're better at escaping the predators and all these sorts of things. And how the human being was kind of different because Allah created us primarily as potential, unrealized potential, this kind of amazing and amazingly powerful tools such as the intellect and compassion and mercy and all these different things that we have, language, that are in us, but that they're not yet ready to go. They're not yet ready to be deployed. They're not yet ready to be used in our favor or to benefit us at all without undergoing some sort of development. And if they're developed, then we become perhaps stronger than any of Allah's creations, or at least potentially more noble. And if we don't develop anything, then we remain this kind of weak, blameworthy creature. That was one of the main points that we had gotten to that Raghib al-Asfahani said last week. He's going to further this theme this week. The next chapter that we have, he goes back to talking about the conditional superiority of man. Okay, so before he was talking about, the chapter before this was titled The Superiority of Human Beings Over the Other Animals. And he kind of tipped his cards and showed us, without telling us, that that superiority was not absolute, that it was conditional. And so this week, in this chapter, he goes full into that conditional superiority, that it's not absolute, that it has to be earned and it has to be worked towards. And he bases all of this off of a surah that most of you know, Surah Al-Shams, where Allah says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says what we can translate to mean that this is right after Allah talks about the soul. And Surah Al-Shams, the chapter entitled "The Sun," is one of the most interesting surahs in the last 30th of the Quran, if not the entire Quran, because Allah begins it by this huge chain of swearing, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا, and on and on and on. He keeps swearing by different aspects of the creation, drawing our attention to this, drawing our attention to that, and keep on moving and moving. He strings together more there than in perhaps any other place in the Quran. And then he swears by the human soul, وَنَفْسِهِ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. And so he's talking about the human soul, and he swears by it, because when Allah swears by something, he's drawing our attention to the miraculous nature of something that demonstrates the power and the ingenuity and the genius of Allah. And then he says, the person who is successful is the one who purifies that soul. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. And the person who has lost their way and lost everything is the person who neglects that soul and therefore buries it. They cover it over. And that covering over happens via our impulses and our urges and our habits and our desires and our whims and our excuses and all these other things that basically take the place of our own self-development, right? So Allah didn't give us a third option, right? He didn't say you're successful if you purify that soul, and you're really, really a goner if you abuse that soul, and if you don't do anything, you'll just be between the two. No, he didn't say that. He only gave us two options. He said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. The person is successful who purifies it. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. And the only other option, other than purifying it, is to bury it, is to let it atrophy, right? Like anything else that we've been given. If you don't use a certain muscle, your arm or your leg, for example, or your hand, for months and months and months, it grows frail. The muscles stop working. Everything that we have, including our soul, Allah is telling us, is use it or lose it. And so we are only given two options. Either we purify our soul and thus we become aflaha, we succeed, or by either neglect or even worse, abuse, we bury it. It becomes dirty. It works against us and becomes the cause for our own ruin. So this kind of, these two options that Allah gives us in this chapter, Surah Al-Shams, is the basis for Raghib al-Asfahani's chapter, the conditional superiority of man. Our superiority is not guaranteed. We do not have a birthright to superiority. It has to be earned. And it's only earned if we develop ourselves and purify ourselves. And if we don't, we've completely abandoned that gift or that title, and we don't deserve it. Raghib al-Asfahani actually quotes a line of poetry. فَلَمْ يُرَى فِي عُيُوبِ النَّاسِ شَيْءٌ كَنَقْصِ الْقَادِرِينَ عَلَى التَّمَامِ. The meaning of the line of poetry is there was never seen a worse trait or a worse characteristic than someone who's full of potential not realizing it. and he's talking about the entire human, he's talking about the entire human species here. So if human beings are only a potentially better species, then their mission or their charge or their trust is to develop that potential. And if we don't, then we are no better than the animals. In fact, sometimes, as he'll explain in later chapters, we are actually much worse. Just like in English, in Arabic, there are certain animals that are associated with certain negative traits, right? So Raghib al-Asfahani, he starts going through these negative traits that are associated with certain animals, and basically saying that if you don't take time to purify yourself or establish habits or break these certain tendencies that are lying inside of you, latent, then you too will come to embody these sorts of characteristics. You become kind of more animalistic yourself. So for example, this is one that crosses both Arabic and English. Like we associate pigs with gluttony, right? He's a pig, he's gluttonous. Everything that he sees and he wants, he just automatically has to consume it. There's no filter, right? If someone comes over your house and you offer them something to food, there's no even pretense of saying, no, thank you very much, it's kind of you, I'm okay. And then maybe after the second and third and fourth invite, well, maybe, okay, sure, just a little something, right? This is big in Arab culture especially. The glutton, the person who has gluttony, they have no filter. They're offered something, they want it, yes, I have to have it, give it to me, right? And if they have the power, then they're just going to take it. And some people have that gluttony in them. They only are missing the power to take what they want. But if they were given the power, they would take absolutely everything that they wanted. Money, food, wealth, status, relationships, anything. So Raghib al-Asfahani is telling us that it takes training to break that tendency. It takes training to break something like gluttony. To be in a position, okay, there's levels to it. To be in a position, first of all, where you have that filter, where you exercise restraint. Let's say for iftar during Ramadan, right? You've been fasting all day, and you have a comfortable life. Let's say you make enough money, you have a good house, you have a fridge full of food, right? And it's time to break fast. And there's people in the masjid who don't have a job, or there's people in the masjid who are really, really like struggling, don't have food in their fridge. But you in that moment, you've been waiting all day and you're looking forward to the bakora and you're looking forward to the this and the that, the biryani. And that is a test, that moment. It's very, very hard to control yourself and to have that filter and to take only what you need, or maybe even less than that. That takes training. That's one level. There's levels beyond that. There's a concept that the Salaf used to talk about called ithar. Ithar is something that is a quality that Allah praises people for in the Quran. Allah says in Surah Al-Hashr, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةٌ. It's giving preference to others in their time of need, even if you yourself are in need. That's another level far beyond merely having a filter. You have something and you yourself are in such bad need of that thing, but you know that your brother Muslim or your sister Muslim also needs that thing. And you've developed yourself and trained yourself to the point where you want that person to have that thing more than you want to have it, or at least you know that it's the right thing to do, and so you do it. That's something that doesn't come naturally to people. That's something that requires development, refinement, practice, training. Those levels of mastery of the self These qualities that we're talking about don't come except by training. This actual ayah of the Quran that I mentioned, there's a specific story about this, where there was a couple, and they were a poor couple, companions, and they had children, and they had so little food that the mother and father were going to go to bed hungry. They were basically the only food that they had, they were going to give to their kids for their daily meal. Now the father goes to pray Isha at the Prophet's masjid, and the Prophet ﷺ has a guest. Now the Prophet ﷺ, he was someone who lived in poverty his entire life. There were times where he was driven out of his home because of hunger. He often would ask Aisha when he woke up, do we have anything, any food? She would say no. And so he would say, okay, I'll fast today. That was his life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a guest, he knew he didn't have anything to give this guest. He asked the companions after the Isha prayer, he said, can anybody host this guest of ours? And the Ansari man, the father of that family, immediately raised his hand and said, yes, I'll take him. Even though he didn't have anything. He wanted the reward. He wanted the points with Allah. He wanted the practice to develop and train himself. And so he brings the man home, and he comes in the door, and the first thing he says to his wife is, we have the guest of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And him and his wife work in perfect tandem. She doesn't say like, oh my God, how could you do this to me? Why did you spring this guy on me? You know we don't have any food in the house. What she does is amazing. She goes and takes the food that's going to go to her children, and she serves it to the guest instead. And she pretends like she's boiling food and getting food ready in the pot for the children. And she turns down the light, the lamp, the oil lamp, lower and lower and lower, until the children, they're waiting for the food, they fall asleep while they're waiting for the food. And so she feeds the guests from her own children's food, and they wait until tomorrow. They go to bed hungry. They eat the next day. That takes training. That takes amazing faith and amazing training. And then what happened was the Prophet ﷺ was informed of what they did. And he told them how pleased Allah was with it. And that verse of the Quran was revealed in Surah Al-Hashr. So Raghib al-Asfahani, he keeps going. So we don't want to be gluttonous like pigs. So we need training. It takes training to break that gluttony from us. We don't want to have the contempt or the disdain of camels, right? This is something that's known more in Arab culture, where you have, readily experience with camels. But even in English, we kind of have this sense that camels hold grudges, right? There's a famous story where, there was a camel herder that kind of whipped one of his camels during the day, and the camel obviously didn't like it or appreciate it very much, but he waited until the nighttime, and then the camel herder was sleeping in his tent, and the camel went and sat on the man and his tent and killed him at night, because camels are known to kind of hold these kind of grudges and remember and like kind of be out for revenge. Isn't that also a possibility for man and woman? Isn't that also a possibility for human beings? Don't we also hold grudges? Don't we know people in our families who have gone years without talking to their relatives because of some stupid thing a long time ago that started small, but represented something big in the minds of the people who were kind of in the feud? And then the next thing you know, years are going by and people haven't talked to each other. Human beings are capable of that kind of level of grudge as well. And so Raghib al-Asfahani is telling us, if you don't train yourself, if you don't purify your soul and train yourself to have compassion and have forgiveness and kind of extinguish that need for revenge or getting back or I'll show you. If we don't do that, then we too will become like camels in our ability to hold grudges. Then he mentions arrogance, and I guess the Arabs, they have more experience with tigers. For them, the tiger is a symbol of arrogance. For us, we might say maybe the rooster or the peacock, right? Kind of like this strutting about, like you're very important, like the things that you do, it all comes back to you. Well, I did this and I did this and I've got this accomplishment and this accolade and this reward. Raghib al-Asfahani is telling us that in order to not fall into that quality of arrogance, it takes training and gratitude. It takes training and thankfulness and realizing that even our gifts and our talents and even our developed skills are nothing without the success that Allah has granted us. And if Allah had wanted, He could have given it to somebody else. Or if Allah had wanted, we could have spent as much time training and studying and whatever we did, and Allah could have still prevented us from seeing success because of that training or those skills or those talents. So training oneself with gratitude is the antidote to this sort of thing. If we don't train ourselves, then we'll become the same. We'll become the roosters strutting around, puffing out our chests. Look at me, look at me. He mentions the cunning of foxes. This is something in our culture as well, where the fox, he uses his wits and his intelligence to get what he wants. It doesn't matter who he has to trick, who he has to fool. There are no rules. He'll say anything, do anything to get what he wants in his object. And so human beings, if we do not train ourselves, we can easily become like that. Maybe some of us know people like that. If we don't train ourselves to be transparent and be forthcoming and be this concept of, in Arabic, nasuh. Nasuh is like somebody who wants the best, not just for themselves, but for other people, and wants what's best for other people at the same level that they want the best for themselves, if not more. And then Raghib al-Asfahani, he ends this kind of list of animals and these kind of qualities that we associate with them and the need to develop ourselves so that we don't fall into these kinds of habits. And he says, occasionally, you will find people who have neglected their souls so much and neglected their and abused their souls and fed the ego until they haven't just developed one of these qualities, they've developed all of them. The gluttony, the contempt, the grudge, holding grudges, the arrogance. And to the end of it, and he says these people are embodiments of the devil himself. And even this he bases in a Quranic ayah in Surah Al-Ma'idah, when Allah is talking about a group of the Jews after Moses passed. He said, وَجَعَلَ مِنْهُمُ الْقِرَدَةَ وَالْخَنَازِيرَ وَعَبْدَ الطَّاغُوتِ. Allah says that as punishment for what some of these people were doing, He made them monkeys and swine and devils. Abd al-Taghut, worshippers, like devil worshippers, people who have transgressed all bounds. And so Raghib al-Asfahani uses this ayah to justify what he's saying, that there's people who maybe catch individual qualities of this, acting like this or acting like that. And then there's some people that get the whole package, and those people are not just animals, but worse than animals. So only if we develop our intellect and refine our actions, refine our spirits, do we become fully human. That is Raghib's message to us. He says that if we continue to develop them, so it's almost like this kind of spectrum. He's like, we're born here and we have this potential. If we develop and develop and develop, we will reach the level of human. But he says there's more than that. There's levels beyond that. We can keep on developing until we reach a level that is even saintly, or a level that is akin to the angels themselves. He even bases this off of the Quran as well in Surah Yusuf, when the women have the encounter, right? The Al-Aziz's wife invites Yusuf, invites all the women over who have been gossiping about her, and then tells Yusuf to come in. What do they say? All the women, they say, "In hada illa malakun kareem." This is nothing but an angel, they say, looking at Yusuf, because Yusuf has all of these qualities. He has intellect, and he has honor, and he has transparency, and he has goodwill. He has wisdom. He's trained himself and refined himself with the success of Allah. And so because of this refinement, he is recognized as somebody who is angelic. As for the starting point of every human being, as Raghib al-Asfahani has told us, it's between the two. We have animal on one pole and we have angel on the other, and mankind, they start out here. They start out in between. He justifies this by Allah's statement in Surah Al-Balad, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. Allah says that we guided people and we showed them the two ways. This verse has many valid interpretations, and none of them contradict the other. The two ways, they can represent both intellect on one hand and impulse on the other. They can represent blasphemy on one hand, and belief on the other. They can represent guidance on the one hand and delusion on the other. Distinction on one hand and defect on the other. Eternal life on one hand and eternal damnation on the other. So Raghib al-Asfahani says that human beings are part animal and part angel. We're part animal in our impulse that we have. We have the same urges and impulses to food, to money, to wealth, to intimacy, these sorts of things. And all of those urges and impulses, what's the purpose of the Shariah? The purposes of the Shariah is to refine and direct and focus those impulses in a way that actually benefits ourselves both in this life and the next. But we're also part angel. Our ability or potential for wisdom and our potential for justice and generosity, all of these things represent our potentiality on the other side, our angelic nature. And so if animals are here and angels are here, then the human being has the ability or the potential to surpass the angels. Why? Because the angels do what they do and they don't have a choice. They obey Allah, they worship Allah constantly, but they never get to decide whether to worship or not. And so if a person gets to the point where they've refined themselves and they've converted everything that they do into worship, even their seemingly monotonous daily chores and activities, their relationships, everything, then they actually surpass the angels because they've chosen that. They have the ability to choose otherwise. And the same thing on the other end of the scale, we have animals, and animals do what they do. That's their fitrah, that's their innate disposition that they're created upon. They're not morally culpable for what they do, even if we say that pigs are greedy and camels hold grudges and these sorts of things. Those aren't moral decisions that they're making. Those are just things that they're doing because that's the way Allah created them without this sort of choice. So if a human being then chooses those qualities, or at least neglects his soul or her soul to the point where they're making those decisions and deepening those qualities in themselves, then they go beyond, and they are worse than animals. Just like Allah says in the Quran that they are abal. They are more astray. He compares them to baha'im. So they're like cattle. بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ. He said, and then Allah says, nay, they're even worse. They're even further astray. Because cattle do what they do automatically. They had no option to be any other way. We had the chance, and we either took it or we squandered it. The next chapter is fantastic, but it's a little long. Does anybody have any questions? Either unmute yourself or put it in the chat. And if you don't, then we'll at least start it and we can recap it for next week and continue, inshallah. I have a new scenery this week because I'm traveling, as some of you know. Okay, I'll begin the next chapter, and if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate. So the next chapter is a chapter that I had alluded to a couple of classes ago. One of the main chapters of the book and of this first section, where Raghib al-Asfahani is going to talk about the purpose of human life. Okay, and I had begun, I think, on the first day of class. Let's see, what surah regarding about feeding the guest? That is Surah Al-Hashr. Surah Al-Hashr. I don't know how you would translate it. Maybe the gathering or the gathering together. It's in the, I don't know the number of the surah. Sorry. It's in the 28th juz, a little before halfway through that juz. Yep. So I had asked I think in the very first class, what's the purpose of life? Why are we here? You know, and I said that the questions that, or excuse me, the answers that Muslims have ready to deploy for that question are typically inadequate and insufficient, because we respond with something that is factually true, but that is not relevant to someone who's looking for purpose, especially a Muslim who's looking for purpose, a Muslim who already knows that they have to fast, they have to pray, they have to eat halal, they have to do these sorts of things. And if they come and they ask, what's the purpose? Why am I doing all of this stuff? What your average Muslim will say is that, well, our purpose is to worship. Allah said in Surah Dhariyah, He said, وَمَا خَلَقَتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created, Allah says, I have not created the jinn or people except for them to worship me. And you can see how this answer is true, but it's kind of circular logic when it comes to responding to somebody's concern or their doubt or their feeling of purposelessness. I asked you, what's the purpose behind all of this? And you tell me the purpose is just to do it. It seems like there's no end in sight. There's no rhyme or reason. I don't understand. Right? And so Raghib al-Asfahani, he's going to give us a more robust answer to this question, and one that is more satisfying to somebody who's approaching these sorts of questions. So he breaks down the purpose of human life into three categories, and he justifies everything, as he always does, by the Quran, because Raghib al-Asfahani is a master of the Quran. He says the first purpose is what's called imaratul ard. Imaratul ard, settling upon the earth. He justifies this by an ayah in Surah Hud, where Allah says, وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا. Allah settled you therein. And so, Raghib, this level of purpose, the imara, settling upon earth, kind of represents all of our basic necessities, our worldly life, the need to provide food and clothing and shelter and money, and to, have spouses and have children and progeny and all these sorts of things, right? This is all represented It's one of the purposes of our lives. Allah has made it something so close to us that it's a universal, right? Every single person has experience with this. So it is one of the purposes of our lives. Allah wouldn't make it something so close to us and not be one of the purposes to our existence. But it's not the only one. The second purpose, Raghib al-Asfahani says, is the famous answer, ibadatullah, worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is based off of the ayah that we mentioned in Surah Al-Dhariyah, وَمَا خَلَقَتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. But we have not created jinn or mankind except for them to worship Allah. This refers to your devotion, your obligatory prayers, your keeping halal, your wearing the hijab, fasting Ramadan, making Hajj and Umrah, paying zakat. Everything that you do that you think bread and butter Islamic worship, this is represented in the second category here, ibadah. But Raghib al-Asfahani, he says that there's a third level. There's a third level, and it gets to the core of what this entire book is about. And that level is khilafah. Khilafah, which we could translate as being Allah's representative, being a steward of Allah upon earth, being a successor of Allah upon this earth. Raghib al-Asfahani, he justifies this by an ayah in Surah Al-A'raf, where Allah says, وَيَسْتَخْلِفَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَيَنْظُرَ كَيْفَ تَعْمَلُونَ. Allah says that He will cause you to succeed. He will cause you to be a representative or a successor. He will make you a successor on earth, and He will see what you do with it. Basically, He will look at the results. He's watching to see, here's your opportunity. What are you going to make of this opportunity? So Raghib al-Asfahani, he tells us that what this level is about is the purpose of humans representing Allah on earth means managing and embodying Allah's qualities in our management of the earth, both in the way that we manage resources, the way that we manage land, the way that we manage relationships, the way that we build communities, the way that we treat each other. We can breathe into all of this activity qualities that belong to Allah and that Allah loves, and that Allah loves to see us bring about in His creation, such as mercy, such as wisdom, such as justice, such as forbearance, such as excellence, bounty, these sorts of things. All of these qualities that are qualities of Allah and that Allah loves us to have, and that Allah wants to see us bring about in creation, these are called Makarim Shariah. They're the title of the book. These finer qualities, these elite qualities. And so the title of the book, Dhariyah, ila Makarim Shariah, it translates to something like the path to obtaining these elite qualities of the Sharia. And this purpose of khilafah, of being this representation figure, this figure of representing Allah on earth and managing it in the way Allah wants us to manage it, by breathing in to everything that we do, the mercy and the love and the wisdom and the knowledge and justice. This is our higher purpose. And the way to do it is by developing in ourselves the Makarim al-Shariah, all these qualities. We have to first, if we want to bring about these, if it's our purpose to bring about these qualities upon earth, and it's our higher purpose, then we must first bring about these qualities in ourselves. Because if we can't, then how are we going to bring them about in the earth outside of our own selves? It's not possible. This is a much more satisfying answer to anybody who is struggling with purpose, because it's an aspirational purpose. As opposed to the previous one, to worship Allah, it's somewhat aspirational, but it's mostly descriptive as well. Our existence is worshiping Allah, and our purpose, yes, is to worship Allah. That's something that's baseline. But our higher purpose that Allah wants to see all of us achieve is to be His representative on earth, to bring about those qualities that Allah has here on earth, in our families, in ourselves first, in our families, and in our communities. And that's a really good place to stop, because it's not too far into that chapter, and it sets us up for next time. Anybody have any questions? There's a minute left on the clock before the session will end on its own. Final question? Okay. If that is all for everyone, then we ask Allah to benefit us by this knowledge and to aid us and help us to do His will and His wish on earth. And thank you very much, everyone, for your participation and your listening. And we will see you next time, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ameen.